All right, welcome into the Multifamily Investor Playbook. We have another special guest today, and we're so excited to chat with you, Alexander. So, Alexander Morsink is the CEO, ultimate designated person, and co founder of Equivesto Inc. Now, Equivesto is a Canadian based online private investment platform, but most importantly, licensed exempt market dealer. So since 2020, Equivesto has helped raise over 170 million in capital for Canadian businesses. Alexander is also an angel investor and a member and director of the Niagara Angel Network, a local angel investment group. Alexander is also an advisor mentor at numerous accelerators and incubators and a guest speaker at conferences, universities, and business schools across Canada. Alexander also sits on the Registrant Advisory Committee of the Ontario Securities Commission. So he's got a front row seat to everything that's going on in the regulatory environment with private investments. And Alexander was also awarded the top 40 under 40 business leaders by Business Link Media in 2026 and named an emerging Canadian business leader by the Peak Media Group in 2023. So welcome, Alexander. So good to have you today.
Yeah, it's great to be here. Clearly, I have too many things going on. I gotta quit some stuff.
That's right. Yeah, a lot on your plate, it sounds like, for sure. But, it's like the old saying goes, if you want to get something done, give it to the busiest person, right?
Right. Yeah,
So
exactly.
I'm
Exactly.
with you there. But, it's funny, we were kind of chatting a little bit beforehand, and I know you're big into motorcycles. So I'd love to hear a little
Mhm.
bit more about that.
Yeah, yeah. So I learned to ride years ago, over 10 years ago. Definitely a passion of mine, and I actually have a new bike that's arriving hopefully in the next week or two. So I'm looking forward to that.
Nice. Are you more road or off road? What's your vibe?
Definitely on the road. I know a lot of people get their start with motorcycling with like motocross and sort of dirt biking and everything. I did not grow up motorcycling, so I started in the classroom and in the graduated licensing program we have here in Canada. So definitely on the road, but yeah, looking forward to getting my bike. It's a super bike. It's a Ducati. So looking
Oh,
forward
beautiful.
to, yeah, nice and red.
Yeah.
Classic, stuff, so looking forward to that.
I love that. Yeah. So for me, my motorcycle experience, it was sort of funny because it was completely like crazy and backwards. But what happened is there's this company called Wilderness Collective, and they're based out of Los Angeles. But kind of just through the algorithm on social media, I don't know, it wasn't me, but a friend started getting their stuff, and then next thing you know, we're kind of sharing it around. And what they do are these like 4-day digital detox things where you
Mm,
you literally turn your phone in at the beginning of the trip. I mean, partly you're not gonna get any service where you're going anyway, but it's kind of part of the experience.
right.
And then they, have a lead guy in the front, somebody in the back. They have a truck follow along, and they're cooking all your meals. So it's kind of like glamping combined with dirt biking and a little road biking. And so, long story short, I was like, I'm in. We signed up, and then all of a sudden, I'm like, I've never ridden a motorcycle my whole life, right? So, and I'm like, oh, and I need a motorcycle license. So, long story short, I did a weekend course, kind of probably likely what you sort of went through. Actually, first on the dirt bike, because I was like, let me check that box first. And then I was
Right.
like, okay, not so bad, and it had some, logs to go over, but nothing too crazy. And then, I had to take another weekend course to get the licensing. And I'm proud to report I've now done two of these trips, and outside of a few, pieces of road rash and a couple wipeouts, nothing broken, But
Okay.
my wife was just looking at me like, "Are you crazy? You've never been on a motorcycle, and you're about to go do a 400-mile ride." But what's amazing, dude, is we go from like Fresno to like Yosemite, California. The other one we
Wow.
started outside of Utah, went through Bryce Canyon and,
Mm,
God, I'm trying to remember, Zion. And so just like the most incredible views, and you're camping in the mountains. And so, I want to do a few more of those at some point, but, I've never bought the bike for the house just because I live in the suburbs. I'm like, where would I ride the thing,
yeah.
But,
Well,
I
that's
still got the
incredible.
bug.
Yeah. That's like you went from nothing to like that's kind of holy grail type experience for people with bikes. So you're getting the full range clearly.
That's right, and, sort of baptized by fire, but it was cool because the first day, they're kind of doing the talk at the beginning. There's, like, the safety conversation, and it was interesting. They said, they give us this device, right? And it's like, if you hold this button down for like 5 seconds, a helicopter is deployed to your location, right? And he's like, just so you know, that's like anywhere from a $15,000 to $50,000 button push. So don't push it unless you really, really need it. But take it easy. Don't feel any need to go fast. So the fast people can be in the front, the slow people in the back. We'll take our time. But what they did say is the people that tend to get hurt out there are the most experienced riders because they show off or they think they
Right.
can do it all, right? But it was neat. It was sort of like 25% on roads, 25% or so on like Forest Service roads, so like dirt roads, and then 50% where we were like jumping over logs and doing the whole thing. And so really neat experience and met some really cool people. In fact, this guy Jonathan Nolan, Christopher Nolan, a lot of people know because he did like Oppenheimer and The
Yeah, the
Batman
director, yeah.
Begins and all those big movies, Inception. His brother's also in the film industry, and he did that show Westworld, and he has the show Fallout. Well, it was like the next morning after spending a whole day with this guy because he introduced himself as Jonah, and he said, "Oh, my brother's finishing this movie," and he was describing. I was like, "Is your brother Christopher Nolan?" And he's like, "Yeah, I'm Jonathan Nolan, but I go by Jonah. Jonathan's just my professional name." So I'm sitting here hanging out. So it's just so cool. These different kind of people from all over the country, and I
Wow.
mean, it's super famous filmmaker. So it was really fun, man. But yeah, one of these days maybe we can sync up on one of those trips together, right?
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. And motorcycling is such a great way to unplug for sure. So great.
Well, the way I viewed it, because I actually was telling my wife about it, I was like, and it sounds almost funny, but it's the one time, or one of a few times in my life where, people talk about flow state. And it was like, that's kind of what it felt like. In other words, all I could focus on was like the 10 feet in front of me, right? And like, just, not necessarily scared, but like just making sure I'm thinking straight and I'm like, paying attention. And, if you find yourself in a rut, just, love the rut you're in and just like all those lessons they taught us. So for those 4 days over those two trips, it's like, I didn't really think about work. I didn't really think about my family. I just was sort of in this zone. And so, yeah, on a couple trips when, family trips, we were in Costa Rica, for example, I just, called up a company and they delivered a bike to the house just for kind of scooting around to the beach or whatever. Got my wife on the back, which I was surprised. I figured she would turn me down, but we had a little fun with it. But yeah, you're right. It's a great way to just kind of like, really see, right? A lot of times when you're driving around, you don't even see what's around you, but it's just such a unique experience. But we could probably talk motorcycles for forever. But let's dive in. So, you know, most people, especially if they're new to private investing, aren't really even familiar with the term exempt market dealer. So, in the simplest terms, what do you do and who do you do it for?
Yeah. So essentially, an exempt market dealer is that sort of third party licensed organization that helps individual investors actually make their investments. So if you think about a normal investment that you would be making in the stock market, for example, right? You're not going to Tesla themselves and saying, "Hey, Elon, can I buy some shares?" You're either going to an investment advisor at your local bank, or you're using a discount brokerage online, but you're using a licensed middle entity to help you purchase those shares. So an exempt market dealer is that. It's a securities dealer, a shares, investment dealer, but for the private market. And in Canada, the private market is called the exempt market. So the name, it describes itself, but in legalese.
Yeah, 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 right. That's kind of the what I've noticed with financial and lawyers, right? They create a lot of, fancy words that kind of can sometimes confuse the matter. But, to your point, when an investor asks me, it's like, yeah, it's like going to your financial planner to buy a stock. And effectively what you're doing is you're buying shares in this business that just in our context happens to be an apartment building, or another context might be an industrial building, or
Exactly.
really,
Yeah.
a lot of different asset classes. There's really hundreds of them, right? So that is the simplest term. Now, when you set out to start Equivesto, what were you trying to solve for? Like, what did you notice in terms of a gap in the Canadian investor market that you were trying to sort of like fill that gap with?
Yeah, great question. So initially, let's rewind back 10 years to when I was co founding Equivesto. I was working in corporate banking at Scotiabank. I was interested in actually starting to invest, not necessarily in real estate, but in early stage companies, in startups, in sort of the venture capital type world. And I was working in corporate banking, quite experienced in assessing and reviewing companies. But because I wasn't an accredited investor yet at the time, when I was looking to get into it, I actually learned that okay, there's not really a legal way for me to start investing in these companies. Because at the time, the rules in Canada said you had to be an accredited investor to go into those type of deals. And
Right.
that was very frustrating to me. And I was chatting
Mhm.
with my co-founder, friend from university, Ryan. He also, he was kind of on the flip side of that coin. So he was starting some startups and he was trying to go out and bring investors in. And he was also sort of running into that problem of, not being able to access as much capital unless you kind of knew the right people in the right places. And
Right.
so we started looking into like, okay, who is in the business of connecting these private companies? And it's then that we learned about exempt market dealers, but also that the rules in Canada were in the process of being changed. So
Mm.
we sort of felt, okay, this is kind of a sea change moment. This is the potential of opening up a new market, making private investing, which has been sort of the dominion of only the ultra, ultra rich for a long time, making it more accessible to all Canadians. And we wanted to sort of get involved. So it took us about 3.5 years to self teach ourselves, the exempt market laws and everything to build the technology platform and then to apply and actually get licensed because the human doesn't get licensed as the exempt market dealer. It's the corporation and everything. So
Right.
the requirements are quite long. But yeah, we got licensed there. And then really just through the demand of the market, we learned that there's more and more different sort of industries in the private space that want this service. So we started with sort of startups, venture capital space, and then rapidly expanded to everything sort of in between, real estate, mining,
Yeah.
small commercial business. And so we kind of operate across the spectrum.
Yeah. So, in other words, a small business maybe needs to raise some capital to buy some equipment, and that would be potentially something that they could, an investor could invest in through a platform like an exempt market dealer. Would that be fair to say?
Absolutely. We
Yeah.
we've specifically helped some small businesses, specifically restaurants, allow their own communities to invest in them starting at like $500. And so we can kind of cover the whole gambit.
Yeah, that's so cool. So, you sort of touched on this already that kind of in a sense the way the exempt market dealer and actually I'm going to back up just for a quick second because many of our investors, are listening to this podcast or in our deal, so they've learned some of this stuff. But for newer folks, you mentioned the exempt market dealer is the company, but the dealing representative is like an individual licensed within that exempt market dealer. So you might
Right.
talk to a dealing rep at an exempt market dealer, right? Did I get that
Correct.
right? Yeah.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah. So I always like to do that because sometimes, even on our side, we really try to slow it down. But, you get in the industry and you're like, yeah, your dealing rep will call you. And it's like, just so for that clarity, the dealing representatives work for the exempt market dealer. Now,
Right.
you touched on this actually a second ago, that idea that, is this just for the ultra wealthy? But tell me, is it more accessible than most people think, these types of investments?
Well, and that's sort of exactly the point. Really, that's kind of
Yeah.
why we're here, and that's what we aim to do with the platform. Like if we look back 10 years ago, the whole process was kind of if you know the right people, you can get in the room. Everything is very physical, manual. You're going to the lawyer's office to sign the documents.
Yeah.
You know, the forms that we have, fully digital on our platform that you can do anywhere. That was a 2-hour phone call with, as you said, a licensed dealing rep who's taking notes and writing this all down. And so, with our approach and how we sort of entered the space, my background was not as an exempt market dealer
Right.
employee somewhere else. I hadn't been in the exempt market world before. And that made things harder in a lot of ways, but also it meant I didn't fall into some of the sort of traps that, oh,
Mm.
this is just how people do it. And so we were able to kind of approach with fresh eyes how exempt market dealers can operate in Canada. And we've really tried to use that to make the process easier and smoother for investors, less of a hassle. But at the same time, we want to do a better job of supporting the investors, helping them make an informed decision, make it easier for you as an issuer where the process is sort of streamlined and goes faster. And on one hand, you have the regulators who want to make sure that everybody is, all the investors are being protected. The work is being done to ensure that they're suitable and eligible to make the investment. And then at the other side, you've got both the investors and the companies saying, hurry up, I just want to kind
Yeah.
of get this done. And
Right.
I feel like we've done a very good job of kind of balancing those things. So the process is as nice as it can be, and
Yeah.
we're always looking to improve that, but is as nice as we can kind of get it at this moment in time, but at the same time is still really providing that support and that sort of protection that the regulators are ensuring is in place.
Yeah, that's right. Well, and you sort of touched on that, right? So, that idea that, many companies, it can feel like like an audit essentially. I mean, you're on the phone for 2 hours and you're answering a million questions. And that's what a lot of our investors have identified, that ability to just sort of upload the supporting documentation, right? Those tax returns, maybe some statements from their investment accounts. And so it was interesting. I was actually talking to Madison on our team, who's our director of finance, but as you know, was also a licensed dealing rep. And she said, the more I thought about it is like that's such a safer process, not only for the investor because it's faster and easier, but even just to correct because you're confirming this factual data with like supporting documentation where some exempt market dealers will just ask you a bunch of questions and in a sense take you at your word on it, right? And so, for
You're
me,
taking me to a
that client.
dangerous place here, John.
Well, yeah, that's right. But the verification is huge. But the other side of it, once again, is just it's a better experience for the investor, right? They don't have to
No,
have, how much is your
absolutely.
home worth? How much is your debt? It's like very invasive versus, hey, here's the data.
Well, and
Yeah,
that's really where, again, because we didn't come from inside the industry, our focus was very much like, okay, how do we do this what we feel like is the right way, the safest way to protect the investor, but also how do we make the process smoother and faster? And where I have to be a bit careful is my comments on the industry or whatever, but the regulators, our responsibility as an exempt market dealer is to complete a know your customer verification. So, is this person who they say they are? But also a determination of suitability and eligibility. So, we have to look at their entire personal and financial picture, how many kids they have, where they live, all that sort of stuff, where they work, on and on and on, investment thesis and all that stuff, and make a determination of does this investment sort of make sense for that person. Now, the the regulator requires us to do that, but they don't create a detailed checklist of how they want people to do that. And so certain exempt market dealers approach it by saying, okay, we're going to have a long conversation with the person, but because maybe they think it's less invasive to not collect any documentation. From our perspective, we want to make sure if we are on the line for confirming that you qualify, and some of the qualifications are black and white, numerical, like is your net financial assets over this number?
right.
It's
Yep.
very easy for us to say, hey, you know, rather than us ask you a bunch of questions and then we're writing that all down. We're keeping that in the records, so it's not like because you told it to somebody on the phone, it's more secure than if you sent through a secure file drop. Either way, we're collecting and storing the information. For us to collect the material, we can verify it kind of in black and white. And not that it's happened with any of your customers, but we certainly have situations where people have come in for other deals. They've been approved as accredited somewhere else. Turns out they're not accredited.
Yeah, that's
And
right.
so that creates a problem for the investor and it creates a problem for the deal, of course, because now you're potentially liable because you took in somebody you shouldn't. And we wanted to just simplify the whole process. So part of me on that committee is, is trying to ask the OSC to do a better job of clarifying that for the industry.
Yeah, that's right. It's an unfortunate reality, but I mean, I'm down in the US as you know, and in the States, we often sometimes have multiple agencies with conflicting regulations, right? So best laid intentions to kind of build a program or a plan, but sometimes, it's the bureaucrats don't necessarily understand it, right? And so they're writing
Right.
rules on things and to your point, it's not you're not just asking for some supporting documentation. But it's a form that gets filled out. You verify all the information. So there's a lot of things behind the scenes, but it just allows, I think, the investor to move through it a little more quickly, which I think they
Absolutely.
appreciate. And I think a lot of our investors with previous EMDs, while they didn't have necessarily a bad experience, they're like, we saw some fallout. I'll just leave it there that, people are like, that was a lot, And so, for us, it's all about how do we make it easy, but also make it very compliant so that we're following all the rules. Cause in my mind, this is black and white stuff. There's no gray areas, right? You're either
Absolutely.
are you aren't, and we got to verify that. So
For
anyway, I
sure.
love that forward thinking approach. And You're right. Sometimes when you come into a new industry from with an outsider perspective, the learning curve might be higher, but you sometimes see opportunities that others miss that are too close to it, right? And I think that's a great example there. What would you say maybe the biggest misconception investors have about putting money into, say, private investments or private companies?
Yeah, I obviously there's a lot to sort of learn about investing in private companies and private businesses. And so if somebody is relatively new to it, there's a few different ways that I could maybe sort of take that question. I think maybe one that is potentially the most frustrating for some clients, not necessarily yours. All the Ferris community is fantastic, but certainly the the belief or the learning, discovering the realization that you can't actually just invest however much you want in
Right.
any deal. A lot of people fairly say, "Hey, I've worked hard. I've made this money. I deserve to put it wherever I like. I can go to the casino and put it on black. Like, why, why can't I put it in this thing?" And that is an argument I've heard many times, and I fully understand and appreciate that point. I am not the regulator, but we as a country and the U.S. as well has essentially decided we want regulators to put guardrails on to protect investors.
Right.
And in Canada, the way basically some of that is sort of actually crystallized is there are rules and requirements around being able to invest certain amounts. And part of our job is to have those conversations with investors. If somebody for example, is confirmed as accredited, they have over 1 million in net financial assets, but they want to put the full 1 million, all the money they have into the Ferris deal. As much as I would love to support them with that, we're going to have a few conversations about
Yeah.
some of the risks associated with that and whether that's sort of the right decision. And that can be something that people find very frustrating because they're like, hey, it's my money. I can do with what I want. Um, but those are the rules, and that we voted for these rules in this country, and so we're here to sort of try to support investors and keep them safe while still following those rules and meeting the investors' objectives.
No, that's right. Without putting words in your mouth, the idea is that they're going to look at sort of like concentration and just say maybe one operator, right? So how much are you investing with one particular group? There could be some risk associated with that if something goes wrong with that particular operator. And then it's an even asset class, right? Like, is this something that's also looked at, right? So
Exactly.
you're not putting all your, to use the
Eggs
cliche, all
into
your eggs in one basket, right?
100%, right? The
Yeah.
the the concern of the regulator is somebody puts, they talk to you on the phone, John, you're a very convincing, nice person, and they're like, "You know what? I just want to give John everything." And then something goes wrong, not necessarily your fault, but something goes wrong and things don't sort of work out as planned. The regulator wants to make sure that nobody is being utterly sort of left destitute by any one investment decision. And so when we're looking at, an investor in their situation, we're trying to see, okay, where does this fit compared to everything else you're doing? And, if this one industry or this factor were to sort of go down, what would kind of be the knock on effects? And are things kind of spread out enough? And that's really where a lot of the focus is, exactly as you said, around concentration on an annual basis, on an overall basis, on an issuer basis.
Yeah, that's right. In a sense, it's almost like they're trying to force a certain amount of diversification, right? Like, so you're not, just putting all your things
Absolutely.
into one industry or one thing, right? It's interesting because, I don't know the Canadian laws on the side of the stock market, but I don't suspect that's the case. I mean, I guess if you want to put all your money on Tesla, you can. But, on the private side, there is a little more scrutiny. But, once again, I think these are good thoughts. I tend to fall more on the side of like, it's my money. I should be able to do with it what I want. But I do appreciate the idea that they are trying to look out for the best interests of the investor. And, diversification is a real thing, right? Like, I would never tell anybody to put all your money in private market investments, right? You
Right.
should have some stocks, bonds, and some real estate and, maybe some income generating, maybe some private debt. I know a lot of Canadians like investing in the mortgage market, right? So, you want to have a diversification. So if there is, an industry or something happens to, one class, right, you can balance it out, right,
Right.
and not lose everything all at once. So
Well,
yeah,
and
it's
that's one thing with the sort of private market. Like the private market has clearly some benefits. It also has some drawbacks, right? Some of the benefits are there's higher potential returns, the companies can move faster, they have less overhead expenses to do with sort of reporting, and so they can really focus on passing those returns, to the investors. At the same time, the flip side, there isn't really a secondary market, and so the main challenge is in, for example, using your stock market situation. If somebody put everything into Tesla, but they decided they changed their mind, they could take it out 3 weeks later. Whereas with a private investment, you're typically locked in for a considerable duration until some sort of liquidity event associated with the underlying investment. Now, on one hand, that means you have less liquidity. That would be a negative. But there is actually a clear positive to that as well, which is you're not going to see the crazy price fluctuations that you would see potentially in a public market. And because the private market is a bit separated from the public markets, it can sort of survive sometimes certain economic conditions that would negatively impact your returns in the public markets. So there's it's two sides of a coin.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, 100%. Yeah. It's such an interesting thing because all this is so new. I mean, even in the United States, the rules really changed around 2012. So, I think this will be really helpful for a lot of our, I would say, potential investors that are listening to this, and for our investors that are listening, just really helping better understand, right? So, we kind of touched on that know your customer, sort of know your client process. Can you just walk us through maybe in a little bit more detail what that really looks like in practice and why it benefits the investor?
Absolutely. So the process is designed to be straightforward and it's fully online, sort of fully digital. So it's something that you can sort of do kind of any time of the day that you prefer. But essentially, it's going to start with you creating your account on Equivesto. So you would have had a conversation with, John, another member of the Ferris team, whomever. You would be introduced to Equivesto and given the link to go ahead and create your account. So you would create the account, then you'd be given access to your investor onboarding forms. There's a couple of pages of forms there. This is where you're really giving us all those answers to those questions that help us do that sort of full review. And during this form, that's where you're going to be selecting, that you're proceeding as an accredited investor, and you would be attaching, the supporting documentation that John mentioned. So maybe your CRA notice of assessment showing your income, or your T4, or perhaps some bank statements or something like that to verify your net financial assets. Either way, you're submitting all that kind of in one shot. So you sat down, you filled out the forms. If you're going speedy, maybe you could do it in sort of 3, 4 minutes. If you're taking your time, maybe sort of 10, 11 minutes, you filled out the forms and you submit them. That goes immediately to a member of our team, a licensed dealing representative who will be reviewing all the documentation you've submitted, confirming, your ID, confirming your suitability, that you're accredited, and setting individualized recommended investment limits for you. So that process, you know, typically we tell people to expect a response within one business day, but we aim to do it within hours or even minutes so that people don't have a lot of downtime. So you'll then get an email back saying, thanks for applying. Either, hey, I need to clarify a couple things about your application, or congratulations, your account's all approved. Here's your investment limits. You can go ahead and initiate your transaction. Once your account's approved, you would go straight to the Ferris page. You can review all the information about the offering there. So I would certainly recommend you take your time and assess all those materials in detail. But when you're ready to initiate a transaction, you're going to click there's a button that says ready to invest or invest now on the sort of right hand side of the screen. You'd click that. It would ask you, how many units of the limited partnership or shares of the corporation you want to purchase. You check the amount that you want to invest. It would then ask you a couple more confirmation questions, and then it would generate your investment documents. So you'd then get an email to your email associated with your account with a link to the actual documents to sign. The documents are pre-filled with all of your information from the Equivesto portal, including the amount you're investing and all those details. So you're really just signing on the dotted line, initialing a couple places, providing your, SIN number or business number, and then you submit those forms. On those forms, you're also going to be, if you're allowing us to pull the funds as opposed to wiring them yourself. You'd provide your bank account details, and then we will collect the funds automatically from your bank account. So once you complete the form, your work is essentially done. Our
Yeah.
team then takes that. It would go over to John. You would be reviewing and countersigning the document, and then we would be able to actually automatically pull the funds from the investor's account. The investor doesn't have to do any more work. They're just all set. We would then be holding the funds in our segregated trust account until we're ready to initiate a closing. And typically, with your deals, because you guys move pretty quick, we do a closing every 2 weeks. So every 2 weeks, we gather up all the documents and the funds and we release them to you and everything. And then you guys actually issue the limited partnership units for the investors. So we release the funds from trust and then they officially have their investment.
Yeah, that's right. It's just a very thoughtful and I think user friendly experience because you have that dealing rep there who's looking at everything. Any questions you have, you can jump on a call. But for somebody like, for example, we have over 40% of our investors, as you know, Alexander, have invested in multiple deals that we've done. So that investor who's maybe investing the second or third time, who's already gone through that process, it just you can kind of skip some of those steps. Now, correct me if I'm wrong. I believe every year the know your client process does restart, right? You have to double check
Correct.
that every on an
Correct.
annual
So
basis.
so just to expand on that a little bit, if you've already invested in a deal before, you already filled out those initial long forms, your account's approved. You don't have to do them again every time you do a deal. You're right. Every year we have to sort of double check, hey, has there been any large changes, any updates to any of the information? That is like a more automated outreach. So we only do that when you initiate another transaction and it's been more than a year since your first one.
Yeah,
So
that's right.
we would then just reach out and say, hey, this is kind of the information you had with us before. Any changes? You sort of let us know what's different, or you say, no, nothing's changed. We then take care of the rest. And then you can again just go ahead and immediately go forward with the transaction. And the document signing process, once your account's set up, that's really a sort of 2, 3 minute, check the boxes, type in your signature type thing. So the idea is trying to make it as streamlined as possible for people, as few hurdles. But if people do want help, that's where we've got the dealing reps who are available. We do a one-to-one introduction every time. So when you're getting introduced to Equivesto, you're being introduced to a human on the Equivesto side. If you do have questions, there's a phone number and an email so you can reach out and speak to a person, not some sort of AI bot thing.
Yeah, yeah, I love it. No, it's a really cool product that y'all built, and our investors absolutely love it. They give us a lot of great feedback on it. So, final question before we wrap up here. In terms of the companies you choose to do business with, right? Like the operators, like you don't just let anybody on the platform. So what is that process that, you go through at Equivesto to vet the companies or the operators that you're allowing onto the platform?
Yeah, this part is a little bit less visible to the public, so I'm glad you asked this question. It is quite extensive. So we're talking to anywhere, between 50 and 100 companies a month, and we might be selecting one or two of them to do business with.
Mm,
And for us, we're really looking for, a high quality operator who understands what they're doing, has a honest and respectful approach to business as a sort of starting point. And then we have our essentially 2 to 3 month long due diligence process into every offering that gets made available on the Equivesta platform. So that process, the due diligence process that we called KYP or Know Your Product, that process is pretty extensive. Multiple levels of background checks, ID confirmations. We go through the entire business structure. We look at your financial projections, your targets. We're verifying that you do have the right documents showing you own the properties at all the different locations. Doing our sort of our own version of a feasibility study. I can't even list them all of all
yeah.
the things that we do. It
Yeah.
is quite extensive, but the idea is when an investor comes to the Equivesto page and they look at the information that's been presented, they know that we, Equivesto, have done everything we can to double check and verify what they're seeing on the page. And that we're trying to just build that fundamental layer of trust into the transaction, because if you're just doing a deal on your own and you're trying to, say, oh, somebody's approached you and they're saying, hey, come invest in this project, it's very difficult for an individual person to go through all of the work on their own, or even to know how to do the work on their own to verify that, potential investment opportunity that that person's bringing to them. And so our role is not just sort of confirming the investors are suitable, but also making sure when an investor's looking at a deal, they're looking at true verified information, in a real entity that owns, the assets that they say they do and everything like that. Now, we're not promising that all the deals are going to be successful. We certainly hope so. But our focus is really on making sure the true information is made available to the investor. So then the investor can make their own determination about whether that deal makes sense for them.
That's right. So just for clarity for the listeners, so full background check on the operators themselves. So myself, Mark, all the major players within the business, looking at the track record of our business, so things like, have you had any, run-ins with the Ontario Securities Commission or any other securities commissions or any fraud or bankruptcy? So it's a really deep background check on, the principals, the operators themselves, but on a deal by deal basis. And, I'm not going to give you the full checklist, listener, but it's our financial model. It's the loan term sheets, it's the insurance binder, and then all the way down to the property level, all the property condition assessment, environmental reports, appraisals, surveys. So just about anything you can imagine that goes into a deal on our side is given to Equivesto for their approval. So to your point, Alexander, you can't predict the future, right? But what you can do is at least confirm that our assumptions are based on reality and real information and that. So our model itself on any deal, I mean, it's 20 tab Excel document and it's very complicated. And I can tell you sometimes we get questioned on tab 7, like line 64B, like, wait a minute, where did this number come from, right? So it's a very detailed process on the front end. So by the time it makes it to that Equivesto page, you can rest assured not only have they done their due diligence on us as operators, but at the individual deal level, every new deal is given that same level of scrutiny.
Absolutely.
And candidly, we love that, right? Because, it is nice to have a third party set of eyes just to make sure we didn't miss something, or maybe there's something we should consider, right? And, we do a pretty good job, I think, delivering clean packages, but occasionally somebody's like, maybe reword this or look at that projection, make sure that's correct. And we make those final adjustments before anything's presented to the investor. So, it's another set of eyes on every single deal we do, which we love.
Absolutely. And it's the structure of the deal, and a lot of it is also the legal paperwork as well, which is the least sexy part of it, but one of the areas where there can sometimes be the most trip up. So we spend a fair amount of time on that as well.
That's right. Yeah, the limited partnership agreements, the subscription agreements, the offering memorandums. And I tell investors, it may not be the funnest way to spend an hour, but like read the documents. They're there for a reason. They discuss all the risks, all the things they need to be mindful of. And I will say on our deals, as you know, Alexander, we try to be rinse and repeat, right? So from deal to deal, those documents aren't changing dramatically. But obviously, one of the areas, our securities attorney, we actually had John Lee, as you know, our Canadian securities attorney on an episode recently. So, he's looking at regulations and the laws and the rules, and, sometimes changes are made. So we may have to incorporate updates, right, as new rules come out.
Absolutely.
But we try to keep it to where it's, hopefully get to a point where you can read through them a little bit faster on deal number 2 and 3, because it's the same thing effectively, just with the deal specific information put in. But Alexander, this has been great. And I will say, if you're listening to this and you're an operator and you're doing business in Canada, reach out to Equivesto. They're fantastic to work with, just kind, nice, but highly intelligent. And, the fact that you're advising the OSC is super cool to us, so we know you got that ear right there where you're hearing and learning as things are coming out. But it's just been such a wonderful relationship. So we're so thankful and happy to have you here. And if you're listening to this, we actually just launched a new deal. It's a little premature as I'm recording this to tell you about it, but when you hear it, you can go to our website and learn more about it because it'll be approved by then. It'll be out in a few weeks, Alexander. But it's an exciting time, and we it takes 300 deals to find one that works for us. So when we find one, it's always an exciting time. So we've been deep in the process with Alexander and his team getting everything checked and approved. So when you're listening to this, go to ferriscapitalpartners.com to learn more. You can also go to fulloutinvesting.com. That's a website we created. It's just a one-page website, has a link to a video that walks you through our entire process from identifying the asset to exit. We also have a sample deal deck where you can just sort of see the types of deals we're targeting. as well as an opportunity to book a call with Mark and myself if you'd like to learn more. Thank you so much for listening to the Multifamily Investor Playbook. If you like this content, please like, subscribe, and share with another high net worth investor that you think could benefit from it. We love and believe in you. Keep dreaming and investing big.